Part 11. Science uses exact terms and definitions in debate, and the debate is rational. Faith uses inexact terms in debate, and the discourse is oftentimes irrational and directionless, without foundation. The sudden intuitive dawning, this aha experience at my middle age that I appear to be experiencing, brings some mixed feelings. I feel like I have lost an innocence after having faith in a protective sort of way, having faith in a protector in the sky just a short time ago. The death of my Uncle Charlie is bringing a feeling stronger than ever that an unexamined life is not worth living. To examine life to its fullest is to search out the most important question. The most important question right now is the God question, one we as humans seem to be the most conflicted about. I too am deeply conflicted about this question. Reading Sam Harris, Carl Sagan, Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens gives me hope in the rationality possible in the human race. It also brings a sense of longing for spiritual belief more than ever. It's like a void that needs to be filled with something, but we don't know what to fill it with. This Amazon reviewer talks about how his life has gone into a sort of depressive tailspin after reading Richard Dawkins. He talks about how his once pure spiritual outlook has been battered. It is interesting that he admits that Dawkins is too convincing in his arguments against supernaturalism. He says the book renders a God, a supreme power of any sort, quite superfluous for the purpose of accounting for the way the world is and the way that life is. It accounts for the nature of life and for human nature only too well, whereas most religions or spiritual outlooks raise problems that have to be gotten around. It presents an appallingly pessimistic view of human nature. It makes life seem utterly pointless. Yet I cannot present any arguments to refute this point of view. I still try to have some kind of spiritual outlook, but it's definitely battered. And I have not yet overcome the effects of this book on me. Richard Dawkins seems to have the idea that religion and spirituality are not only false, but ultimately unable to give a real sense of meaning and purpose in life. Their satisfaction is hollow, empty, and unreal in his apparent view, and only a scientific understanding of life can give real lasting sense of wonder and purpose. Now, I would question this. While I'm not sure what, if anything, there is spiritual, I know that a scientific view of life cannot offer the slightest hope of life after death. And since we're all going to die, most of us don't want to. This is a crippling drawback to the kind of scientific vision Dawkins wants us all to have. If there is nothing beyond death, no spiritual dimension to anything, and everything is just a blind dance of atoms, I fail to see how this by itself can give one a real sense of purpose, however fascinating the dance that Dawkins describes. And it is fascinating. Let there be no mistake about that. Because of this, I have the curious feeling of dichotomy about Dawkins' book that is certainly fascinating on one level, but that I cannot give even qualified emotional commitment to the outlook on life that seems to lie behind it. I would in the end rather have the hope of something wonderful and purposeful that only some spiritual outlook can offer, even though it may be a deluded fantasy, than the certainty of a scientific vision that eliminates any possibility of long-term hope, that condemns us to an empty, eternal death of nothingness in the end. This scientific view may be completely rational, but rationality is not the only important consideration to shape our outlook on life. Anyone who has a narrow religious view of life, who is absolutely sure the religion is completely right, would be best off avoiding this book like the plague. It probably won't change their views, but they will quite likely get very upset and outraged. And anyone with an open-minded spiritual view had better at least be prepared to do a lot of thinking, and perhaps willing to change some of their views, because this book will challenge almost every one of your spiritual views, spiritual religious viewpoints, whether it is of the open-minded or dogmatic sort. Some critics of this book have found its reasoning unconvincing, its materialist reductionism too superficial and shallow. But from my perspective, the problem does not lie here. The problem with the book is that it is too convincing, that it's entirely convincing. The book makes it very difficult to continue to believe in anything that contradicts its basic premise, but which might be more comforting and might give a greater sense of hope and inspiration and provide a real sense of purpose in life. Such have its effects on my life been that in my more depressed moments, I have desperately wished I could unread the book and continue life from where I left off, just to go back. It has been said that each of us has a God-shaped hole inside, and that we spend most of our lives trying to fill it with the wrong things. I firmly believe that the God-shaped hole is there, and that we have inner longings of a wonderful sort, almost impossible to describe in words. Whether a God exists to fill it, I do not yet know, but what I am sure of is that as wonderful as Dawkins' view of nature and life may be on its own level, it will not fill that God-shaped hole. The question is what to do with the spiritual hole. I say fill it with wonderment about the natural world. Be thankful for every single day, every hour you're on the planet. Whatever it is, it's more than kind of neat just to think of scientific discoveries that await us, having to do with time, space, genetic memory, etc., etc. The emperor definitely has no clothes, and that's important. That's an important one. Is to think independently. You've got to be able to reject a construct, this paradigm that's been dominating, called spirituality, for many, many years. The question is what to do with the spiritual hole, to fill it up with the wonder of science. I've started a book by John Updike. I'm switching the subject here. I've started a book by John Updike called In the Beauty of the Lilies. It is about a pastor who's losing his faith and cannot in good conscience go on preaching because it is not what he feels in his heart. To the chagrin of his wife, he says he wants to quit the church. His life is in a tailspin because he cannot face the possibility of being a fake to himself, thinking that any meaningful life has to be grounded in truth first and foremost. This is a sort of bind I feel like I'm in right now, to be true to myself or to politically pacify my family. A Letter to a Christian Nation by Sam Harris inspired me to write this essay. There's an interesting comment about the book by a reviewer. The author's points, this is quote unquote, this is an anonymous reviewer, the author's points, it starts off, about embryonic stem cell research and creationism in the public schools are extremely important for anybody who embraces modern progress, that is, while a handful of other authors attempt to feebly argue the ridiculous idea that modern science was produced by Christian thinking. Sam Harris explains what should be obvious, that religion is now and always has been a serious impediment to science. They go against each other, which is the prime insight, I think, here. That they're kind of like oil and water, but can meet at certain points. Some people are currently trying to force public schools to teach their children that their ancient creation myth, a fantastic story for which there is no contradictory evidence, is a good, viable alternative to evolution, that they can stand side by side and be counted as equals. And a well-established scientific explanation of human development for which there's a mountain of supporting evidence. These same folks also wish to impede embryonic stem cell research, which could potentially, in my opinion, result in cures and treatments for numerous human diseases and afflictions, simply because their prudery-inspired anti-abortion agenda has forced them into an absurd logical conclusion of contending that a 3-day-old blastocyst in a petri dish is a full-fledged person, possessing the same rights as anyone reading this sentence. Now, these religious opponents of progress will insist until they're blue in the face that they're not against science. But watching them make every attempt to stop the advance of every important science like stem cell research and evolution, while at the same time insisting they support real science, is like watching a beast man deny that he has a weight problem while he dines on a bucket of fried chicken. It's patently obvious. There are many very real contradictions in religious thought because it is not logical. It is not rational. I find scientific statements like this fascinating. A sugar cube of neutron star stuff on Earth would weigh as much as all of humanity. A sugar cube of neutron star stuff. It's a compressed, a dwarf star. Not quite a black hole, but a neutron star. There's so much we don't know about our universe. Why isn't the Bible more humble? And why isn't the marvelous universe addressed in this book of knowledge? There's no evidence of intellectual curiosity in the Bible. Maybe we need a new book. Maybe we need a new book. Why isn't Michael Behe more humble when he throws up his hands and says everything is irreducibly complex? In The Origin of the Species, Charles Darwin wrote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find out no such case. No doubt many organs exist of which we do not know the transitional grades, the gaps, so to speak, more especially if we look to too much isolated species around which, according to my theory, there has been much extinction. Or again, if we look into an organ common to all of the members of a large class, for in this latter class the organ must have been first formed at an extremely remote period, since which all the many members of the class have been developed. And in order to discover the early transitional grades through which the organ has passed, we should have to look to a very ancient ancestral form." Also, Albert Einstein quoted here. Albert Einstein once said, "The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mysterious." This is one of my favorite quotes. "It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead, a snuffed-out candle." And we'll leave it there for till the next time. Quoting Albert Einstein and Charles Darwin.